Big lenders lift interest rates as house sellers have a rough weekend. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese heads to Jakarta as China calls for an improvement in relations between Beijing and Canberra. And the government and employers are at odds over how much low-paid workers should get. It's Monday, the 6th of June, 2022. Welcome to Fear and Greed, Australia's most popular business podcast. I'm Michael Thompson, and good morning, Sean Aylmer.
Good morning, Michael. Now, I know you were out of town for the weekend, but I was in Sydney over the weekend and I went to the Vivid Festival. I have never seen, maybe New Year's Eve, but I've never really seen as many people on the streets of the Sydney CBD as there were over the weekend on Saturday night. It was fantastic. Very, very post-COVID.
And it was certainly cancelled for a couple of years, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Over COVID. So it would certainly give a feel that kind of Sydney is coming back to life. And Vivid is one of those festivals that kind of brings people in from all over the country because it is pretty spectacular.
Oh, sure. I mean, it was pretty chilly, but lots of families out and about. There just wasn't the crowd control you get at New Year's Eve. So I would say it was busier than I have ever seen Sydney, including New Year's Eve, because there wasn't the crowd control and the restaurants were full, the pubs were buzzing. It was great. It felt like COVID wasn't with us anymore.
And Sean, do you know what else is significant about today?
What is significant about the today? 6th of the 6th.
I feel like actually this is quite a stretch now too. I've oversold this as being a significant day. It is 15 days now until the winter solstice, which is the point at which obviously when the days start to get longer and the nights start to get shorter. So which means that there will be more time to enjoy things during the day, like getting out and about in the city.
I reckon that's a stretch.
It was a stretch, but you know what? I was thinking about it over the weekend. I'm like, how far is it to the winter solstice? Because these days are getting way too short for my liking, and I just need to be heading back into spring, heading back into summer, which is a bad thing to be saying when you're only 6 days into winter, isn't it? So I thought I'll cling to the winter solstice coming up in 15 days and might have oversold a little bit. But anyway, Sean, we need to get on with the show because you've got an interesting chat coming up afterwards with Nicholas Bryan from the Atlantic Pacific Australian Equity Fund.
Yes, we talked about value investing and growth investing and the sorts of stock sectors that he likes and the ones he doesn't like. Very interesting.
Yeah, it is a good one. But the main story this morning, Sean, is about the Reserve Bank. It's set to lift interest rates by somewhere between 25 and 50 basis points when it meets tomorrow. But the big lenders are already moving on fixed rates.
Yes, over the past 10 days, Commonwealth Bank, National Australia Bank, Westpac and ANZ have all upped fixed rates for home loans for owner-occupiers and investors. It means no major bank is offering a fixed rate loan for any term under 3%, according to ratecity.com.au. While variable rates mostly move alongside the official cash rate set by the Reserve Bank, fixed-term rates rely more on financial markets and interest rate expectations, and they've soared. A year ago, the average Big Four bank 3-year fixed rate was well below the lowest standard variable rate. It was about 60 basis points below. Today, it's about 2.6% above it. Massive move in fixed rate loans.
Wow, that is a big difference. And Sean, it's already hitting the housing market, isn't it? Because we know in some cities, including Sydney and Melbourne, prices went backwards last month, and that softness appeared to continue over the weekend.
Yes, the preliminary clearance rate for auctions in Sydney was under 60%, according to CoreLogic. That's the first time in quite some time. And around 20% of auctions in the city were cancelled as vendors got cold feet. But there has been a rush of people selling ahead of auction, supporting the notion that vendors are getting worried they won't be able to sell at auction. Melbourne's preliminary clearance rate was slightly better than Sydney at 61%, and nationally it was 62%. The national market is dominated by Sydney and Melbourne just because of their size, but some of the smaller capital cities are doing okay. Adelaide's preliminary clearance rate over the weekend was 76%, Canberra was 71%, and Brisbane was 65%. Not bad for Brisbane, but really well off the peak of a few months back.
And Sean, all of this is happening while the value of loans for housing is tumbling.
Yes, the Bureau of Statistics figures released on Friday show new housing loan commitments fell more than 6% in April. The slump occurred among owner-occupier loans and investor loans. It was actually the biggest monthly fall in 2 years. So let's put all this together, all this information together. The housing market, it's slowing, and in some cases it's retreating. Sydney is hardest hit. There will, in all likelihood, be another rate rise tomorrow. and that will add to the mire. For the first time in a few years, it's actually a good time to be a buyer rather than a seller.
Alrighty. Now, Sean, how about local markets?
Well, the S&P ASX 200 closed up almost 1% on Friday to 7,239 points. The banks were mixed. South 32 was up another 2%. That company really is doing well. REA Group and ResMed both did well. High iron ore prices helped that sector. Champion Iron was up 7.5%. Fortescue more than 4%. BHP and Rio Tinto both jumped around 2.5%. Lithium stocks, we talked quite a bit about them last week. Lithium stocks extended their rebound from the sell-off mid last week, led by Pilbara Minerals, which was up 6.4%. Liontown Resources jumped 6.3%. Gold Digger Gold Road Resources was the best on the day, up nearly 8%. Helios was the laggard, down 8% after flagging a difficult second half of its financial year. And Domino's Pizza was down 3.5% as well. It's had a pretty rough ride recently.
And what's happening on international markets?
Wall Street finished the weekend lower after a surprisingly strong jobs report. Unemployment in the US is sitting at about 3.6%, and there are about 360,000 jobs created last month. Now, that strong jobs report dashed hopes that the US Federal Reserve may slow the pace of interest rate increases. The Nasdaq fell 2.5%, and the broader-based S&P 500 was down 1.6% over the weekend. The standout was Tesla, which fell more than 9% after reports that the company was considering cutting staff by 10% to counter what Chief Executive Elon Musk called a super bad feeling about the economy. Michael, Brent crude is trading around $120 a barrel. No relief at the petrol bowser for a while. Gold is at $1,850 an ounce, and the Aussie dollar is trading just over 72 US cents.
A super bad feeling about the economy.
That's technical.
That is my kind of technical term. I like that one. And we'll be back in a moment with the rest of the day's business news. Sean, Prime Minister Anthony Albanese is in Indonesia to visit his counterpart today as China's foreign minister called for a reset in Sino-Australian relations.
Mr Albanese flew out yesterday evening, and it's part of his efforts to secure Australia's allies in the region. He'll lead a high-level business delegation, including the heads of BlueScope Steel, Commonwealth Bank and Telstra. When asked about whether he'll attend the G20 meeting in Jakarta later in the year, given Russian President Vladimir Putin is likely to attend, the Prime Minister said he will, though he'll be uncomfortable sitting anywhere near the Russian president.
And Wang Yi, who is China's foreign minister, has urged both Beijing and Canberra to find common ground to help resolve differences.
He made the comments at the end of a 10 Pacific nation visit, and on Friday he signed a series of agreements covering agriculture, economic cooperation and a media partnership with East Timor. Significantly, the small nation won't sign a security pact with China, though. The whole visit hasn't been as successful as hoped, with nations mostly avoiding signing security pacts with China. As for the Australia-China relationship, whilst Wang Yi wants that to improve, and certainly there are some promising signs, early though, sanctions on $20 billion of Australian exports and the detention of 2 Australian citizens need to be resolved first.
Sean, I can't imagine the relationship is going to be helped by the revelation that a Chinese J-19 fighter challenged an Australian maritime surveillance aircraft in international airspace over the South China Sea.
Yeah, I think that's right. Apparently the fighter jet released flares and chaff dangerously close to the RAF aircraft. Defence Minister Richard Marles yesterday called it a very dangerous incident, and the government has raised it with Beijing.
All right, moving on. The federal government late last week put in its submission to the Fair Work Commission on minimum wages. How much weight does the government submission have?
Well, Fair Work is independent and the government submission is just one of many, but it's a pretty important one. Employment Minister Tony Burke said the submission contains a recommendation that real wages of Australia's low-paid workers do not go backwards. At face value, that means a rise of at least 5.1% because that's the inflation rate. Mr Burke said if the Labor government submission is adopted, the gender pay gap would also be reduced, though that's probably because there are more women in low-paid jobs than men.
But employers aren't convinced really that they can afford such a big jump.
That's right. The Australian Chamber of Commerce and Industry submitted that severe labour shortages in tourism, recreation and hospitality are hampering businesses' ability to recover from the pandemic. They argue any increase in minimum wage should be delayed. Submissions are due next week, Michael, and then the Commission will make a ruling for minimum wage rates to kick in on July 1.
Opposition leader Peter Dutton has announced his front bench, including 10 women and 2 former leaders of the National Party, Barnaby Joyce and Michael McCormack.
That's right. Angus Taylor has the all-important Treasury gig. Anne Ruston gets health and aged care. Jane Hume has finance. Andrew Hastie defence. Michaela Cash employment and workplace relations. And Karen Andrews home affairs. Alan Tudge will remain on the front bench looking after education. All these names are so familiar to us because they've been in government for so long. I wonder how they'll handle opposition.
Yeah, it will be a very interesting time. Now, there was some relief around gas supplies over the weekend.
That's right. The Australian Energy Market Operator said strong gas flows from Queensland and reduced demand bolstered supplies in the southeastern states. It means there's sufficient electricity supply to meet forecast demand in the national electricity market. Now, the energy crisis has certainly spurred plenty of debate, and we're going to hear more of it this week and beyond. New Nationals leader David Littleproud on Friday said alternate energy industries needed developing, and he pointed to nuclear energy. And the Australian Industry Group, a peak body of companies, said state moratoriums on gas exploration and production should be scrapped. All of this came as AGL confirmed that one of its 3 units at the Liddell Power Station has been taken out of service for at least a month, so that will put more pressure on the system.
Sean, big tech companies including Atlassian have been quick to offer disgruntled Tesla staff jobs following a few emails from Elon Musk last week.
Yes, remember late last week we told you about Elon Musk, boss of Tesla, emailing staff saying they must be at the office a minimum of 40 hours a week, and if not, he'll assume they've resigned. Not exactly best practice personnel management, or as Atlassian co-founder Scott Farquhar tweeted, something out of the 1950s. Atlassian has the exact opposite view. Last year they told staff they never have to come into the office, and over the past couple of days they've invited Tesla employees to consider a job with the software giant. Elon Musk, of course, responded, saying Farquhar's tweets illustrated why recessions serve a vital economic cleansing function. Rich boys and their toys, Michael.
That's pretty extraordinary. And Sean, I love this next story for 2 reasons, because I learnt 2 things from it. The humble puffer jacket has turned 100 years old. 1, I didn't realise it was that old. And 2, I didn't realise it was Australian.
Well, it was actually made famous by Eddie Bauer, the person and then the retailer, but it was invented by an Australian. Now, you might have heard this story over the weekend, but I have a link to it, so I want to tell it again. The guy who invented it, George Finch, did so ahead of a 1922 British Mount Everest expedition. He called it an eider-down jacket. According to the ABC, it was bright green, made from the skin of a hot air balloon and stuffed with eider-down. Fair enough. It was a long way from the tweeds some of his fellow climbers were wearing, and Mr. Finch was somewhat sneered at base camp, that was. He wore it anyway and apparently had the last laugh on Everest as his companions shivered through the climb, whereas he was quite comfortable, apparently. Why do I like this story so much? The bloke was from Orange, my hometown, and where you visited over the weekend, Michael. Not normally associated with fashionistas, Orange, but the home of the humble puffer jacket.
That is an incredible story, and I have a feeling that you are probably going to be speaking about this one on our weekend edition, which is quite some time away, that you may well be reserving that as your favourite story of the week, because if you don't, I will.
Oh, no, I've got it. Sorry.
Okay.
And you've been in Orange, and I'm actually going to Orange this week too. So I'm going to need the puffer jacket myself.
It does make a lot of sense that you would wear a puffer jacket to Orange, because it is one of the coldest places in this country, I reckon.
That's right.
All right, moving on to overseas news, Sean. Fighting in Ukraine moved back to Kiev, the capital, over the past 24 hours.
Yes, explosions took place in the capital yesterday, though no casualties were reported. Ukrainian air defense forces said they've shot down a Russian missile in the region, but Russia is definitely making inroads in the eastern Luhansk region. After 100 days of fighting, Russia now controls about 1/5 of Ukraine.
Sean, China is set to roll back more COVID restrictions today, with Beijing heading back towards normality.
Yeah, good news for the global economy. Authorities have said the latest outbreak is under control and people will be able to return to offices and factories in Beijing. Restaurants will also reopen. Shanghai is slowly reopening as well. Good news for Chinese peoples and global economy.
And how about this one? We've saved a pretty incredible story for last. LeBron James, who is, of course, the basketball superstar, has become the first active sports person to reach a net worth of $1 billion US.
Yes. Now, Michael Jordan reached billionaire status, but that was 11 years after retiring from the NBA, according to Forbes. LeBron has earned about $400 million in salary during his NBA career with the LA Lakers, Cleveland Cavaliers, and Miami Heat, but business investments and endorsements has brought in about $900 million. Now, some of the companies included in his portfolio include an entertainment business, a pizza shop, and a pretty decent real estate portfolio. He's also actually spent a lot of money back in his hometown of Akron, Ohio, including around sport and education. So he's done some good there too, but good on him. $1 billion, not bad.
That is pretty impressive. I was just curious to see who some of the other really wealthy sports people were. I thought surely Roger Federer should be approaching that kind of status, but he's only worth about $550 million.
Yeah, right. Well, some of those footballers are worth a lot of money.
Yeah, and boxers as well. I think
of course,
Floyd Mayweather's pretty close to the $1 billion mark.
Did you know that in team sports, basketballers actually are the richest per capita, per person, because there are fewer players. So,
really?
The NBA is a massive international sport, which has a lot of money, but it's shared. There's only 5 people on the court at once, and let's say the team itself has 15 to 20 players in it. So that money is shared between those 15 to 20 players in it, whereas the football codes and baseball and some of those things, it's actually shared between a lot more people. So there you go.
There we go. So what's that? 3 things now I've learnt today. 2 about the puffer jacket and 1 about wealthy sports people. Well, today's a good day, Sean. Now, up next is the Fear and Greed Daily interview with Nicholas Bryan from the Atlantic Pacific Australian Equity Fund.
You'll learn something from Nicholas as well, I'd say, and that's whether or not you should be investing in growth stocks or value stocks. In fact, what that actually means to begin with and which are the best ones to invest in at the moment. So I recommend you listen to this one, Michael.
Yeah, absolutely. And just a reminder, make sure you get professional advice before making any investment decisions. Always see a financial advisor. Isn't that right, Sean?
Always see a financial advisor. We love them.
Now, that is up next in the Fear and Greed playlist on your podcast platform or at fearandgreed.com.au. And also, as always, every Monday, don't forget the week ahead with our resident economist, Stephen Koukoulas. He's got a fair bit to chat about, particularly the Reserve Bank board meeting tomorrow.
He does. He thinks that there'll probably be about a 40 basis point rise in the official cash rate, which will cause all other interest rates to rise. Quite excited about the whole thing, I think, Stephen, this morning.
I think you might be right. Thank you very much, Sean.
Thank you, Michael.
It's Monday, the 6th of June, 2022. Make sure you're following the podcast and join us online on LinkedIn, Twitter and Facebook. I'm Michael Thompson, and that was Fear and Greed. Have a great day.